morning, good afternoon once again. Welcome to the fourth session of the Journalist Emeritus Foundation's Global Youth Leadership Program 2025. Today, our theme is Human Rights, Peace and Conflict Resolution. We have amazing experts from different parts of the world with us to address this particular issue. We have recently concluded the ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council's Youth Forum at the United Nations. And excuse me. Yes. Participating at different events, speaking at different forums, and we had fantastic events convened by JWF. I can say that youth human rights defenders, activists have an immense role in making sure that we are living in peaceful and cohesive societies, as they are the leaders of today. So I really hope that this will be a very fruitful session where you have a chance to address your questions as community leaders, young advocates, to our expert speakers. So I'll now give the floor over to Mehmet Kılıç, the president of the Journalist Emeritus Foundation, to lead today's discussion. Over to you, Mehmet.
Thank you, Cemre, for this kind introduction, and thank you and for everyone joining us from all around the world. And on behalf of the Journalists and Writers Foundation, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth session of the Global Youth Leadership Program 2025. And as Cemre mentioned, today's topic is human rights, peace and conflict resolution. And we have three amazing expert speakers with us who have been very active in promoting and protecting human rights worldwide, which is crucial for building peaceful, inclusive, and cohesive societies. Before we start today's session, I just have to say that we are deeply saddened by the passing of Pope Francis. His Holiness was a tireless advocate for peace and remarkable bridge between faith. And Pope Francis's commitment to building peaceful and inclusive societies deeply resonated with our efforts at the JWF. As we bid farewell to His Holiness, we honor his profound legacy of sowing hope, fostering dialogue, and striving for reconciliation and lasting peace throughout the world, and may him rest in peace. And so we are really sad, and we just wanted to give our condolences as we have this event today. So today's discussion on human rights, mediation, and conflict resolution is an important topic for the JWF because as an international civil society organization dedicated to the culture of peace, human rights, and sustainable development, we give emphasis to the promotion and protection of human rights, the rule of law, and the principles of democracy worldwide. In today's discussion, our expert speakers will discuss about the critical role of youth in peacemaking and conflict prevention and resolution, which are critical for sustainable peace and development. They're going to educate us on about the concepts of mediation, conflict transformation, including the concepts of track 1 and track 2 diplomacy, post-war reconciliation, and the challenges of monitoring and evaluating peace processes in fragile and conflict-affected context. We will also learn about the origins of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the UN treaty bodies and UN mechanisms that promote and protect human rights. Lastly, our experts will also share information about their academic and professional careers that can really inspire us all. And for our youth leaders, we are eager to learn and hear from your insights and experiences on the important role of human rights for sustainable peace and development. We would like to hear your insights, your perspectives, experiences, or even ideas on how we can protect and promote human rights and peace building and conflict resolution. Now, it really gives me a great pleasure to introduce our first expert speaker for today's discussion, and Martine Miller, president of the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy. Welcome. Let me give a brief background about Martine Miller. Martine Miller is an executive-level conflict transformation specialist with over 25 years of experience with communities, governments, regional bodies, UN agencies, and a range of international and national non-governmental organizations, academic institutions, and donors. Her work has engaged her in fluid war to post-war reconstruction contexts in over 80 countries across Africa, Central to Southeast Asia and the Pacific, the Middle East and North Africa, Europe, North and South America. She specialized in inclusion, identity, geopolitical, environmental, and climate change dynamics in conflict. Martine has a master's degree in international humanitarian and human rights law, another master's degree in politics, post-war reconstruction and development, and a dual bachelor's degree in political science and international development. Martine, thank you for being with us, and you have the floor.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I have a deep passion for the role of youth in peacemaking, so you're going to hear a lot about that. Could you share with me if you've heard of the 2250 UN resolution on youth, peace, and security? Just make sure that individuals... Do people know of because we're going to talk about that a little bit today from my
Please
perspective.
use either an icon or hands up button so we have an idea.
We've got a thumbs up from one. Okay, we're going to go into detail about that today. And it's good to see such a composition here of different countries. So I see a lot of Cambodia, Afghanistan, the US, the UK, Denmark, Indonesia, the Philippines I saw earlier. So wonderful, wonderful to have you all here. And I want you to think, as I'm going through my sharing, please feel free to think about some of these things within your own context. Also think about them from kind of a regional perspective, because a lot of the dynamics that happen in regards to youth, peace, and security have ripple implications. So to think about it beyond just bound by your community, bound by your border, but think about it more broadly and regional. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And I can get this. Can you see that? Can everyone see that? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. What I'm going to share is the perspective on youth, peace, and security, the development of the youth, peace, and security engagement over the past couple of years and where we stand today, and what that means for what you can possibly do as young people and what the world is possibly needing as we go forward. So I'll start with this. I know we all know the United Nations, and so I wanted to highlight the role of the United Nations, because oftentimes it's a debate on what that role is. So it was formed in 1945 after World War II, and then its goal is the maintenance of international peace and security, and to protect human rights, deliver humanitarian aid, sustainable development, cooperation, and has multiple member states. When it comes to the United Nations, there's also a Security Council and resolutions that they put forward. So you've got the United Nations Security Council, and as the primary body for maintaining international peace and security. Keep in mind, though, that many countries on that Security Council are also invested in war making. If we want to be, open and honest about some of the developments that we're seeing across the globe. There are resolutions that the Security Council and the UN develops, and those are legally binding agreements. And all members of the United Nations agree to accept those decisions by the Security Council and carry out those decisions by the Security Council. So keep that in mind as we move forward here. I'm going to talk about the youth, peace, and security movement over time. This movement started many, many years ago. It started before 2015, actually. In 2014, there were different organizations and different individuals that were thinking about what role do young people play in peacemaking. And so this movement has been something that's been kind of bubbling forward and has become quite dynamic. These are young people that are working in their communities, in their countries for peace, sustainability, and justice. We see that in many countries today. We see it in Sudan. We see it in Syria. We see it in the case of Myanmar. And oftentimes you don't hear about this. I mean, how many of you have heard about the role of young people in peacemaking? We don't hear about it in the mainstream media. We don't hear about it necessarily from political leaders. We don't hear about it necessarily from community leaders. So to think about how much this is missed in our lives and how important it is and how engaged young people have been, it's not being vocalized as it should be. That's something we want to talk about today because that's what this movement is about. And young people are really very much engaged in this movement. So the movement is recognizing, including, and supporting young people's engagement in peace building work globally. That also takes into consideration human rights angles of things that I'm sure will be talked about later on today. But why youth? And this is quite important. 65% of our population is estimated under the age of 35. Young people are considered between the age of 15 and 30, and they're the majority of the population in fragile and conflict-affected societies. I'm going to say the exact same thing for the US, where we're seeing much more polarization in the country, and young people are engaging in ways that I think is significant. So in many cases, youth are the first responders, are quick to adapt. Young people can often engage with their peers very easily. They operate in spaces where governments and international organizations cannot. So you have a specific comparative advantage to contribute to these issues. That's why youth are vital partners. We're seeing that in many countries. We saw that in Cambodia's history, which has been quite dynamic. And we'll see if we can get our Cambodian colleagues to talk a little bit about that. And youth are, and I'm glad this was mentioned earlier, youth are current leaders. They're not the leaders of the future. And we often hear that, oh, you are the leaders of the future. No, youth are current leaders today. And I think we really need to underscore that is your role as young people, like particularly in this group, it seems, to be current leaders in your context and to support other young people to become leaders in their context as well. And this makes a significant impact across a lot of different areas. So peace education, gender inclusion, civic engagement, youth is active in politics even, interfaith dialogue, refugee engagement, which we were talking about earlier, hate speech and mitigating hate speech, electoral violence, sports, media literacy. So across the spectrum, definitely climate-induced types of conflicts and climate concerns. Youth are actually taking a lead in these things. But why not youth? Oftentimes in history, the narrative for youth has been framed from more of the political space as a concern. So it's a demographic divided for economic development, a key kind of resource to be reaped like minerals, cattle, and forests in countries. So education, skills, and employment become a focus. The narrative is often that youth in conflict dynamics are victims and need to be supported, or perpetrators, they need to be stopped. There's been a framing about the youth bulge over time and that young people are generators of violence. And that's been something that's been more escalated in media rather than the peace angle of young people. But when we look at the dynamics of data, it actually shows that the role of young people are more prone toward peacemaking rather than,
Yeah, Martine, just wanted to make sure if you're moving along your slides, we still see number 1. Just so
okay.
you know. Yes, we are still on youth, peace, and security in the screen. Just wanted to make sure.
Sorry, I'm not sure why. Let me stop it and share it again.
That would be great because I see you have number of slides we don't want to miss.
Yeah, I wonder why it's not. 1 second, let's see.
No problem.
Okay, do you see a new slide?
Yes, now we're on, but why not youth?
All right, does it switch now? Wait.
No. If possible, you can also send it to me over chat.
Yeah,
I can help you.
Okay, for some reason, let me see. Can I send it? Sorry, everyone, I didn't want to take up your time.
No problem.
I'm not sure why it wouldn't be switching. Let me see. Okay, there's a version there. Do you see that?
Just a minute.
Okay, let's see if this works. So if you want to, and then everyone will have access to this too, so you can.
I believe you were here at
Yeah,
this
we
one.
talked about why youth. Let's go to the next one, but why not? Okay. So as I had mentioned, one thing that's happened in the past, and one of the biggest hurdles to this over history, has been that young people have been framed as being perpetrators of violence or victims of violence, not actors of peace, like that will bring peace dividends. And so over the past, I don't know, 15 years, there's been a very strong focus and a very strong movement of actors to amplify the role of young people as peace actors rather than, victims or perpetrators. It create and a point on this is, why is it problematic? One thing that's happened when we've talked about the youth bulge is it creates a social mistrust, and that young people don't have their own agency, which is, I think, one key element of why a misunderstanding and not based in any, actual data or research. Do you want to switch to the next slide? As I said earlier, the lack of awareness, negligence, and exclusion. So over 1,000 peace agreements have been signed globally in the last 20 years, but no studies on the role and impact of young people during and the lead up to these peace agreements. And that has missed a key point. There's a national youth policy that was developed that looks, it's a 94-page document serving 400 million youth, has education, skills, and employment referred 105 times, 71 and 45 times. But when it comes to looking at harmony and peace, peace gets 0 and harmony gets 8 mentions. And so when looking at a national youth policy within different countries, that's often missed. And here I'm going to give an example of India. I don't know if we have anyone on here from India. In India's median age is 28 years old. When you look at individuals within the governance structure, the median age is 57. So most of the decisions being made in India are actually have a 30-year age difference. And so what we're seeing is there's not a representation of the needs and interests and movements of the youth in the India space. That's one example of many. Go ahead and switch. And so when we look at the actual data, we're looking at data that says youth affected by violence is about 25%, connected to a missing piece report that has been published. That will be different today because of the different types of conflicts we're seeing where youth are heavily impacted by violence. The Israel-Gaza dynamic, the Ukraine dynamic, Myanmar at the moment. So we're going to have a higher rate of youth affected by violence in comparison to when this report was done. And then when it comes to the framing of youth is often, in more recent years, that youth are engaged in extremism and can easily be persuaded to be engaged in extremism. That's also not represented in the data. So we're seeing a 0.1% on the path to extremism or engage in extremism, and a 0.5% that could possibly fall into an extremist element. So we're seeing predominantly a bigger data set that supports youth as active participants and as civic actors and peacemakers. I'm going to do a next slide. So the path to global consensus, over 11,000 young people from 110 countries and territories influenced the discussion over the past years. And key leaders of that are the United Network of Young Peace Builders, Search for Common Ground, and the government of Jordan actually took a very strong role in supporting young people. You want to switch slides? This led to what we call the UN Security Council Resolution 2250. And it's that first resolution that's ever been put on the table that looks at the role of youth in peace building. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. There were 2 follow-up resolutions that have been significant in support of this. Next slide. So Resolution 2250 was adopted on the 9th of December 2015, an amazing adoption where everyone agreed and raised their hand in support. It formalizes youth, peace, and security agenda as a relevant political field, defines youth as persons between 18 and 29 years old, builds on existing movements of young peace builders worldwide. And the title of the resolution is Maintenance of International Peace and Security, which is a reference to Chapter 7, Article 39 in the UN Charter. And the UN Security Council resolutions under Charter 7 are binding. So when you look at 2250, this is a binding resolution that the United Nations Security Council has agreed to, which means that member states also are in agreement. And so it covers a lot of different things, one being participation, prevention, looking at safety and security, and all the way to reintegration of children or young people affiliated with armed forces. You want to go to the next slide? So the key actions here are participation. One key element is making sure that young people are involved in peacemaking at all decision-making levels. Youth should have a say in what's happening within their country context and what's happening within regions and globally. There's an element of protection, which that young people should be protected by armed conflict. One angle of the protection scheme on this is there is the CRC, which is the resolution on child protection. Young people didn't fall under that protection element, so this gives an opportunity to make sure that, or young people didn't fall under that because it was the child-focused resolution. This gives an opportunity for there to be extra measures to protect young people in violent spaces. And then there's an element of prevention, and then partnership. So partnership is really encouraging and enforcing the importance of young people in peacemaking, and that they should be actors on an equal playing ground. And then, of course, the disengagement and reintegration, which is the part around those impacted and directly engaged in the armed conflicts. So those are the 5 key pillars. And what happened next? There was a progress study, because there wasn't a lot of research on this. Mostly the research was framed around young people as a part of the problem or the victims, as I said earlier. So they wanted to make sure they pulled reliable data, and then also give the opportunity to provide recommendations for the UN and member states and regional organizations and civil society in this space. The point of this would be to localize 2250 into clear practice and support countries to lead national types of programs. So Finland took a very strong role in creating one of the first national plans for youth, peace, and security. So missing pieces, this is the progress study, and these are types of resources that I'm happy to share as we move forward. I'm going to go ahead to the next page. So in the study, there was the participation of focus groups, regional and consultations, online consultations, in-person consultations, and then with network partners. So this covered all of the, as much as possible for this progress study, youth engagement in these spaces and their voices. Next slide. Key findings. 399 youth-led youth peacebuilding organizations. The staff is 97% unpaid volunteers. Gender balance is way better in youth spaces than in any international body, where there was 53% males and 45% females. And the majority operate with limited funding, under about 5,000 per annum. Next slide. So it debunked myths that young migrants and refugees and internally placed people are not a threat to host communities. Young people are not drawn into violence simply because of a lack of employment or education. And hard-fisted law enforcement and security approaches are counterproductive, and they further alienate young people. So those are the myths that were debunked in the report. And then key recommendations included meaningful political and economic participation formally, invest in the capacities and agencies, leadership and coalitions, and partner with youth in all phases. So this came, the next step of this was the formation of another Security Council resolution in support was 2419, and it's mainstreaming the roles of youth in negotiations and formal peace processes and implementing those peace agreements, which is significant because it gets more into detail in regards to the peace process angle of things. And then another one on 2535 and protecting civic and political spaces, diversifying youth participation, implementing through dedicated roadmaps and sufficient resources through a participatory process. This really, I think, is essential, particularly around the political participation elements of it and civic participation elements. And then there's a global coalition of youth, peace, and security, and it's led, as I mentioned, by UNOY, Search for Common Ground, in the United Nations Peace Building Support Office. Okay. And this is where you can look at some of the information in regards to the monitoring and implementation of this approach around youth, peace, and security. I don't know. I think this is something we can talk about a little bit later because I don't want to take too much time away from others, but I think member states are responsible for the implementation, but I think it's vital that youth take a leaning in role, and they actually are. So they're usually leading these conversations, and by leading these conversations, enforcing to the member states and their countries that they have to be a part of those conversations. And forming broader level, more engaged type of dream team collaborations, which has been really significant. It's actually the way that young people have engaged in these peacemaking coalitions have been a lesson that many organizations can learn from, because they've predominantly walked into the room, taken hats off of their organizations and said, what do we do as young people to be successful in the youth, peace, and security space, and really taken the lead on that. Next slide. Another point here is what can we do? In many cases, youth are first responders and quick to adapt, and we've talked about that already. There's a lot of meaningful engagement. We can talk about numerous cases that I think you all could bring into the conversation. And youth initiatives are quite diverse and more dynamic thinking. So there's a flexible approach to that. We noticed that in some work in support of youth peacemakers in Libya, which was significant. And we can talk about that a little bit later if it's helpful. I think one thing is important not to see youth as a monolith, that they are just one group of actors, that they come from different interests and they have different social political agencies. So next slide. And that is a quick rundown of the youth, peace, and security agenda. I think one key element is to take into consideration, it's not, you've got the conflict dynamics and mitigating conflict. You've got an element of the direct peacemaking elements, which is peace process and track 1 to 1.5 to 2 levels. Track 2 is community based. And then there's the post-war reconstruction and reconciliation angle of things. And I think looking at all of that spectrum as key elements where youth need to be involved and supported. And I think we can get into conversations later about how do we look at monitoring and evaluation of these elements. There's always a challenge around that, and I've got a lot of resources, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, thank you so much, Martine, for this wonderful presentation. And we, fully support youth participation in peace and security, and youth empowerment is one of the mandates for our organization. And we will come back to you with questions. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Felicia Clement. She is a PhD candidate in the Global Governance Program at the University of Waterloo in Canada. She also serves as the Research Support Officer for the Global Institutions Diplomacy and Justice Cluster at the Balsillie School of International Affairs. Her doctoral research explores how trust and mistrust influence refugees' journeys and their integration into host communities. In 2020, she earned her master's degree in global governance from the University of Waterloo. She also holds an honors bachelor's degree in global studies and anthropology, graduating with a high distinction. Felicia is deeply passionate about human rights and has previously interned with the Human Rights Organization in Ghana and Austria, which she will share some insights and experiences from this as well. Felicia, thank you for being with us, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. Okay, I think we're good. Everyone can see? Okay, awesome. So, good morning, everyone. I'm very excited, obviously, to be here to talk about human rights, and more specifically, I will also be talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a bit about its origins, mentioning some of the articles. I'll also go into some of the UN mechanisms, what they mean, how they work, and of course, I will also mention some of my own personal experience working for different human rights organizations around the world. Now, to start, obviously the word human rights in and of itself is, something that the UN has defined as inherent to all human beings. This is regardless of race. Sorry, my cat's wanting to participate. Race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, among other statuses as well. They're deemed as universal, inalienable, which means that they cannot be taken away from you. Indivisible, interdependent, which of course means that you don't just get some rights, you don't have access to some, you have access to all of these rights. And that also means that it is equal and non-discriminatory. But what are these rights exactly? I wondered if you could humor me, and if everyone has either a phone or can use their laptop, if you notice at the bottom of the screen, it says menti.com. And if you could type in the code, and basically this is an opportunity for me to see what your knowledge is about human rights. So the question that you'll see posed is, what are examples of human rights? So if you could, as I said, log into that for me, and I will get this open. You can see what other people are thinking. So you should have about 3 different examples. So again, if you could type in that code that I mentioned, 46701571, that at menti.com, and then we can get a bit of a visual of what people think are some examples. I'll give you a few seconds to get that started.
Excuse me, can you show the code again?
Yeah, it's right at the top. It's 46701571.
The link and the code is shared in the chat as well for your convenience.
So we're starting to see some of the different examples that people are suggesting tied to this idea of human rights. So I'll just give it a few more seconds and see what else people put in here. And there's no right or wrong answer. This is just a brainstorming, so I have a bit of an idea of where people's kind of mindsets are at. Okay. So as we can see with some of the examples that were provided, so we see this idea that when we think of examples of human rights, different concepts we think of confidence, we think of freedom of speech. Several people put this right to life, water, religion, freedom of expression. And by the way, when you see the word getting bigger, that means multiple people have put that same answer as well. So we can see freedom of speech and right to life are two answers that people have highlighted as some more prominent examples of human rights. So there's a lot of different, examples that kind of tie into this. And it's great to see kind of where people's mindsets are at, because a lot of the points that you guys have touched on tied to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is what I wanted to pivot to next. Okay, so I'm going to close this. Thanks, guys, for humoring me with that. Okay, so the Universal Declaration of Human Rights obviously is a very foundational, pivotal document. And I just was curious, does anybody know how many articles are in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? If you do, can you share it in the chat for me? You can guess any number. I'm just curious if anyone knows offhand. And if you don't, that's also okay too. Okay, so I don't see any answers in the chat, but that's all right. So there is about 30 articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I will touch upon some of those in the next slide. Another quick question, does anybody know the year that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came into effect? You can also type that in the chat if you happen to know. Okay, yes, yes. Narusha, I hope I said that right, 1948 is correct. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was established December 10th, 1948, and essentially was seen kind of as a monumental moment. So this was created as a result of a Human Rights Commission that was established following World War II to ensure that the tragedies that obviously occurred following, that the atrocities that occurred during that time wouldn't happen again. Now, this commission consisted of about 18 people from various political, cultural, and social backgrounds. So, for example, Eleanor Roosevelt, who is the wife of American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, she chaired the UDHR drafting committee. We also see actors like the committee rapporteur Charles Malkin of Lebanon, the vice chairman Ping Chang of China, and John Humphreys of Canada, who is the director of the UN's Human Rights Division, who helped prepare kind of this blueprint for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, what I find really interesting about this declaration is that I didn't know this until I was just reviewing some things, but it's actually the most translated document in the world. There's about 577 languages that it's translated to and counting. So that's just an interesting tidbit for you. Now, in regards to some of the articles, as I mentioned, there are 30, but I've listed just a few of them here for reference for you. Oh, sorry, guys, I keep clicking my screen here. So the first, which many of you touched upon, was this idea of thought and religion. So known as the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. It talks about this idea of changing religion, either alone or in community with others and in public or private. Another right that I think maybe is not as well known that I thought was interesting was that everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including a reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. So this is something that I think isn't as talked about as much, but it is very much considered a human right to have rest and leisure, of course, to avoid exploitation in the labor force. And another one is number 25. One of the first notes is this idea of standard of living. So this refers to health, well-being, having access to food, clothing, housing, medical care, social services. So all of these different things are also classified as a human right. So a key point that I think is important to note when we think about the Universal Declaration is that it is, of course, a declaration. So what that means is that it is not a treaty, so it is not binding. But of course, as a result of the creation of this declaration, it was able to help kind of influence and become the foundation for what we know now as human rights law, as well as aided in the development of several UN mechanisms to help monitor human rights around the world. So there are two kind of mechanisms that I will be talking about. So the UN has treaty-based body mechanisms and charter-based bodies. So I'll briefly touch on both, but a quick point of difference. charter-based bodies derive from the UN Charter. So the UN Charter, of course, being the foundational document for the creation of the UN. And the treaty-based bodies refer to specific treaties that have been signed by states and therefore are deemed binding. And they look for compliance within the scope of that specific treaty. And I do have a short video that I wanted to show you that kind of explains, I think, in a bit better detail. It was something created by the UN. Don't mind the animation that comes with it. But I think it's a really good way of kind of explaining how this all works.
Felicia, we don't hear the audio, just so you know.
Oh, you don't hear the audio. That's not helpful.
You may quit and reshare by making sure that you click on the button to allow audio share with audio option.
Okay. Apologies, forgot to share with the audio. Okay.
That's fine.
You're probably wondering what all these characters are doing. Start that over. Tell me if you can hear.
People do.
Yes, good now.
For example, we have the right to education, to express ourselves freely, to be protected from violence. These rights are written down in international treaties. Governments sign up to these treaties on behalf of their people. There are 10 core treaties protecting people's rights. Some focus on children, women, persons with disabilities, migrant workers. By signing these treaties, your government promises to respect these rights. But governments don't always keep their promises. And it can be difficult for people to check up on their government. So each treaty is monitored by a group of independent experts from all over the world. These experts come together to work in committees called United Nations Human Rights Treaty Bodies. The experts get information from many sources. The government, of course, but also civil society organisations and individuals. The treaty bodies then question governments in detail about their human rights record. They then report their findings and make recommendations for action. These bodies also address cases where individuals have suffered a miscarriage of justice. The treaty body's recommendations are made public on the UN Human Rights Office website and social media feeds. If your country has been reviewed, you can use these recommendations to encourage the government to take action. You have the right to claim your rights.
So this, I thought, would be a useful video to kind of give an overarching idea of how these treaty-based bodies work. So they talked about in the video how there's about 10 of them. So these are the 10 that are referenced as treaty-based bodies. So as you can tell, the establishment of them has varied. So the very first one was 1969 with the Committee on the Elimination, of Racial Discrimination. The most recent is the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, which came into being in 2010. But as you can see, there's a bunch of different ones: Human Rights Committee, Committee on Migrant Workers, Persons with Disabilities, as the video mentioned as well. So they work together to, of course, hold governments accountable, or certain individuals if an individual is experiencing, injustice. And so these are kind of the main ones that you guys can reference later if you're interested in digging in a bit more. Now, when it comes to the charter-based bodies, there are 4 kind of main ones. And again, like I said, this stems from the UN Charter. So there's the Human Rights Council, which is an intergovernmental body that promotes human rights. There's about 47 states that are involved in this council. There is the Universal Periodic Review, which is basically a 5-year-long cycle to assess human rights records of UN member states. The current review has already started back in 2022 and it's to end in 2027. Then there are special procedures as well, where independent human rights experts can examine human rights from a thematic and country-specific perspective. So what that means is, for example, there's one that's currently open, a thematic case, which looks at the protection and promotion of human rights in the context of climate change. So that's an example of a special procedure. There also is independent investigations where they investigate certain violations of international humanitarian law and in international human rights law as well. So these mechanisms, in combination with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, provide a robust system to help monitor human rights around the world. But what does, working with human rights look like in practice? There are lots of organizations outside of the UN that promote, advocate, and share information about human rights. And I've had the opportunity to work at a couple of them. So one is in Accra, Ghana. I worked for the Human Rights Advocacy Center during my undergraduate degree. So I had the privilege of working as an intern for them. And it's basically a non-for-profit, independent, or nonpartisan organization that was established in 2008 by Nana Obampo-Addo, who was the former Minister for Gender, Children, and Social Protection. And their work focused on 3 main areas: research, advocacy, and the provision of free legal services. Then they work primarily with vulnerable and marginalized people in their communities. So that ties to persons with disabilities, belonging to minority groups, refugees, women, children, among others. So as you can see, what did I do there in relation to the work that they do? I had the fortune of working on a variety of different projects, one of which was access to healthcare, which was essentially a project looking at who had access, who was either scared or intimidated to access healthcare services, and for what reasons. I was there when helping to create a report based on data that was gathered. I also was able to do presentations related to gender-based violence to local schools, as well as attended some stakeholder meetings on corporal punishment. At the time that I was in Ghana, corporal punishment was still quite prominent in several of the school systems, and there was a meeting to talk about whether this practice should still be continued. There were also cases where I can see at the bottom here that I was able to visit 2 different community groups, one in the north and one in the west, which essentially allowed me to come with the organization, learn how they actually assist more vulnerable community groups, asking for what resources, help, what in general stuff do they need in order to kind of thrive in these communities. So if you do have any questions about the specifics of these, I'd be happy to go into a bit further, but I know I should be wrapping up in a few minutes. So you'll notice too on this slide that I did put a couple indications of articles or committees that tie to this. This is not exhaustive. This is just to give you some examples of where their work connects to the bodies in the UN that I've mentioned previously. The second is I worked for the European Training and Research Center for Human Rights in Graz, Austria. So this center deals theoretically as well as practically with questions of how to implement human rights and democracy at local and regional levels. They center on expertise looking to promote human rights education, to promote, like I mentioned, the implementation of human rights, to create what they call human rights cities. So for example, Graz, Austria actually became a human rights city in 2001. What that means is that the city has its framework and its policies and practices based on a human rights approach. So that's kind of, how that they gain that recognition as that type of city. They also work on, combating racism, discrimination by strengthening democracy, rule of law, and good governance. So for myself, at the time that I was working for the ETC, it was during the pandemic, so it was remotely, but I was able to do a lot of research for them. So that includes doing research for their Winter Academy, which is an annual event that looks how to align human rights with local and regional contexts. I was able to look at some of their different publications, help in the creation of a human rights library, which essentially allows resources to be kind of compiled into one central area that doesn't have a paywall. I was able to write about human rights issues in my own country, specifically with water insecurity in Canada's Indigenous communities. And I also had the privilege of attending different forums, for example, the World Human Rights Cities Forum and UNESCO's Regional Expert Consultation Against Racism. So through kind of working with these different organizations, it provided for me an important practical experience to see how human rights work, looks like in practice. So we get to see how these two organizations, although they're looking at human rights, they're looking at it through different ways, and how there are many different ways to approach the complexities that come with addressing human rights. So I know that was a lot to unpack, looking at the Universal Declaration, those mechanisms, and of course the practical experiences. But I hope I gave you guys some food for thought, and I look forward to your questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicia, for your amazing presentation about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and overview of that. And also not only that, but there's the UN mechanisms, either UN charters or UN treaty bodies. These mechanisms really help us to hold perpetrators accountable. And now it's a Q&A session. This is the time to ask your burning questions to our expert speakers. So if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or you can just unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask your question.
So I have a question. Miss Martine Miller, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. So you said that there are just a few successful cases when young people are carriers of peace, and like they are more susceptible to extremism. But I have a question: are there any successful examples of youth-led conflict resolution initiatives around the world? I'll be so glad to hear some maybe successful examples of the kind of projects, maybe.
Right. What I would say is youth are more engaged as peacemakers than they are as contributing to violence. And so based on the research, it's recognizing that youth are more critical in civic society and action. So that's one key element. There are numerous examples. So if you look, is anyone here from Southern Thailand or Thailand? I thought we had someone earlier from Thailand, but I don't know if I see them now. There is, I'll give you an example of Southern Thailand. So it's in the same region. The young people in the South, there's been a heavy conflict that has happened in Southern Thailand that hasn't been globally recognized. It's not as geopolitically prominent as other conflicts that we're seeing. One thing that we've seen in Southern Thailand is the role of young people that have worked alongside women of faith actors, for instance, on building up community and peacemaking. So one thing is they recognized, what can we do in our community to work in collaboration across different segments of society that are in conflict? And how do we build up the education system? How do we build up the healthcare infrastructure that enables us to support our community? So that's one key aspect. So youth have been really involved there. There are regional coalitions and there are international coalitions that have formed across borders of young people that are looking at their role in peacemaking. And what I'll do is I'm going to send an email to the team here, and I'll give you a list of those different things that young people are doing that could be helpful and of interest to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Medina. Gulnar?
Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for the beautiful presentations. My question is for actually anyone to answer. I would like to ask, what is a human rights issue that needs like immediate attention right now, but is often overlooked by people? Because I'm going to be writing an article on human rights, and I would like to focus on something that actually needs attention right now.
Felicia, you want to take this question first, maybe?
Oh, it's a difficult question because we're saying something that's maybe not gaining as much attention right now. The problem, of course, is unfortunately there are a lot of violations that are taking place in a lot of different countries in a lot of different capacities. So to approach kind of the article, what I would suggest is more so looking at a particular human right that you're passionate about, and something that you yourself are really interested in seeing if there's anything being done to kind of address them. So like, for example, when I worked for the ETC and they asked me to write about an issue in my own country, I was like, Canada, what human rights is Canada not following? And I, then I thought, when it comes to our Indigenous peoples, there are numerous examples of violations that are taking place. And that led me to kind of dig deeper into researching more about water insecurity that's happening across this country that's not being addressed by our government. So it really, for me, I don't want to necessarily give you a specific one. I would recommend, is there something maybe even in your own context that you didn't think about, like, that's happening in your country of origin? Or, is there something you're passionate about that you're curious what is being done around the world to address, human rights violation A? So I don't want to necessarily give you an answer for that, but maybe encourage you to think about and look at the declaration and think, going through those different articles, what is something that you're curious about? I know that's not giving you necessarily the answer you were looking for, but that's just more of my suggestion.
Mehmet, would you allow me to contribute very shortly? As you all know, we are plus hundreds years away from ensuring gender equality, and next year there will be elections at the United Nations, and this is a very critical time as many civil society organizations are leading collaborative actions to make sure that member states nominate credible, well-resourced female leaders to be the next Secretary General. So I think in order to boost youth-led efforts to make sure that we change the course of 80 years of male leadership domination at the UN, this could be an interesting article as well, why we need a women Secretary General to lead UN at this very critical times of utmost conflict atmosphere.
Thank you, Cemre, for your contribution. Let's continue with Zehra. You want to ask your question?
Oh, yeah, thank you. So, hello everyone, my name is Oza, I'm from Indonesia. So, I am concerned that all of you has been talking about human rights and also like how impactful our youths are in this era. But from your guys' experiences, how do you guys encourage your people around? I mean, like the youth that you guys are working with through the projects that you have done, because I see that a lot of my friends, especially in college, they don't really aware that how matter they are, maybe in the future or maybe now, because I feel like it's kind of sad, and I'm trying to figure out how to make them understand that they are matter, especially because of they are youth.
Thank you, Martine. You want to take this? How to encourage young people to be more active in peace building initiatives?
Yeah, I have a tendency to I consistently bring up among young people the importance of their role of being current leaders. And so whenever I work on something, I usually there are two groups I usually seek out. They're often young people in the communities and also women's networks. And they have a tendency to be very thoughtful of what's going on within their communities and their countries, and very strategic in how they engage. And so that's from my approach. I think the more that you can advocate for young people getting involved, even if you started a club of young people within your community or within your university, that might be helpful. I posted into the community chat the UNOY, the United Network of Young Peace Builders. They have formed kind of a network, a coalition of different youth-led organizations that are working globally. So you'll see that. You might. I'm happy to give you the contact for the individuals that are there, and if you'd like to reach out to them, they can give you a lot of resources on how you might share, and how vital young people are, and also inspire people to be a part of that movement.
Thank you, Martine. I think it's important to participate in international organizations and events. Felicia also mentioned in her presentation that she participated in different organizations, and we highly recommend our youth leaders to participate in the ECOSOC Youth Forum or AFS Youth Assembly or other international organizations to get to know more about the content, but at the same time to network with different organizations who are already in the field.
Can I just add to that?
Of course.
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent suggestion. I would say, especially when I was in my undergrad and in my master's, this was such a huge resource for me. So being able to, attend these different conferences, in this case virtually, because obviously now things are hybrid, so it certainly makes us easier to access and engage things that maybe we wouldn't be able to. And you never know who you're going to meet. It's really interesting, and what people are thinking about and what they're passionate about and how they're addressing human rights. I think it's such a wonderful kind of forum for, especially if you want to get into the field, to understand what conversations are being had and how you can contribute to those conversations. So I just wanted to second that point, because they were really helpful for me to kind of understand what was going on in the world when it came to human rights.
I think, our time is almost up, and, just wanted to give maybe like some final thoughts or concluding remarks for Martine and Felicia. So if you have any like final thoughts that you would like to share and recommendations possibly.
Final thoughts. If you're wanting any type of resource and contacts, feel free to email me. I've put my email into the link there. I think the other thing I would say is if there are individuals that you would like to speak with, don't hesitate to reach out to them. Oftentimes we think, oh, that's an unreachable, unattainable, contact or a goal. And if you don't ask and if you don't try, it's already a no. So lean in. If you find there's something interesting, just go for it and go ahead and advance. There have been some amazing people that have done amazing things, and they did it in spite of the challenges around them. So that would just be my point. The other thing is it's been, from my perspective in different locations, having had the opportunity to work with young people who really want the best for their communities, has been, an honor. I've learned a lot. And I think you bring a lot of skills with you that you might not recognize, and that others, once you start sharing of yourself and leaning in, they'll recognize and learn from you. So that would be my contribution.
Felicia, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm going to be echoing what Serena and Martine have said, but especially as a student, I'm a PhD, so networking and connecting with people is essential. It's provided me with a lot of different opportunities, not in the human rights area, as well as relating to my work with refugees, and what I've learned, especially through my fieldwork, is being okay with being uncomfortable, because putting yourself out there and that fear of rejection, I get it. And it will happen sometimes, but you have to be willing to be in this, in discomfort, seek discomfort, or however you want to phrase it, because it's in those spaces where you really get to engage and have interesting exchanges and interesting moments with people that you didn't expect. So to give you an example, I was recently at a conference. I was presenting some research, and I was able to connect with this professor who is, an expert in my field, and he was willing to provide me a bit of mentorship, all because we had a conversation and I wasn't afraid to say hello. And it takes those little moments where you can have those opportunities, especially as youth, to reach out to people who have a bit more expertise and maybe give you a bit of guidance if you have questions. So, please don't be afraid to do that. It has been such a wonderful resource for me to be able to reach out to those people and build those networks and those communities and have them as support. Because ultimately, it's not about a hierarchy. They are excited when you want to learn from them and ask questions. So don't be afraid to do that, because it's really exciting when you get to have those moments with people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felicia, for sharing these, experiences. It's definitely, like we have to take action, right? Without taking an action, nothing really happens. I want to take, this opportunity, thank our, expert speakers for joining us, and also our youth leaders. I know you are joining us from different parts of the world, despite different time zones. We appreciate it. And then, Jim, it's over to you, your final thoughts and also reminders, so we can wrap it up.
Thank you so much, Mehmet. I just wanted to reiterate that with the leadership of recently elected Assistant Secretary General on Youth Affairs, Felipe Polier. He's been an amazing leader, opening up more meaningful platforms at the United Nations for youth leadership, both political and in terms of human rights advocacy. Just recently, yesterday, Spain announced that they have launched their new youth delegates program. This is very important that member states are creating platforms, diplomacy engagement opportunities for young leaders. So we should be boosting civil society engagements and advocacy movements, requiring our member states to come up with more of these best practices, policy action-oriented policies at the UN. So there are many opportunities that young leaders can be meaningfully active at peace building and conflict resolution. So let's make sure that we attain all these possible engagements. Thank you so much, and we will be back again next month with a different team. And I know we're out of our time, but if Mehmet has any plans to remind our participants on any other issues, it's over to you.
No, I think our time is already up, but we have just, for our speakers, we have 3 working groups, and they have been meeting. One of them is the Human Rights Working Group, Quality Education Working Group, and the other one is Health and Wellbeing, I guess, no, Interfaith Working Group. So they are meeting among themselves and trying to come up with a project that they could implement. So we will be hearing from them hopefully next time. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.